Let's get right to it. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. Two suspected jihadi attacks in Canada. On Wednesday, a Canadian soldier standing guard at the National War Memorial in Ottawa was shot to death. The suspected gunman, 32-year-old Michael Zihaf Bibu, was killed moments later at the nearby Parliament building. Amateur video captured the moment inside the Parliament. This comes just 2 days after police say another man deliberately drove a car into a pair of soldiers near Montreal. The driver of the car was later shot and killed by police. One of the two soldiers struck in the attack died on Tuesday. Details on the suspects and their motivations are trickling out. Both attacks are believed to be jihadi motivated, as authorities have discovered evidence that both suspects had been radicalized.
In the days to come, we will learn more about the terrorist and any accomplices he may have had. But this week's events are a grim reminder that Canada is not immune to the types of terrorist attacks we have seen elsewhere around the world.
The suspect in the Montreal attack, Martin Couture-Roylieu, was already being investigated by Royal Canadian Mounted Police as early as June. His Facebook account indicated that he was radicalizing himself, but authorities said they were unable to arrest him due to a lack of evidence. In Rome, the Synod of Bishops on the Family wrapped this past weekend. Absent from the final report of the Synod were any of the midterm report statements regarding homosexuals or cohabitating couples that engulfed the Synod in controversy. In the final document, the Synod Fathers expressed encouragement and appreciation for families in light of the struggles they all face. Family life, the message stated, is a mountainous trek with hardships and falls. God is always there to accompany us. We'll unpack the Synod and the Pope's final address in our next segment. Meanwhile, on Sunday, another papal banner was hung over St. Peter's Square as Pope Paul VI was beatified. Pope Paul left an indelible mark on the history of the Church after succeeding John the 23rd in 1963. During his 15-year reign, he was responsible for the implementations of the Second Vatican Council, including the Novus Ordo Mass, as well as the recitation of the sacraments in the local vernacular instead of the Latin. Pope Paul also authored perhaps the most significant papal encyclical in recent church history, Humanae Vitae. Standing against the rising tide of the sexual revolution, the 1968 encyclical affirmed church teaching on the value of human life, marriage, and sexuality. The Beatification Mass was attended by Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, and it is the third time Pope Francis has elevated a 20th century pope this year. Pope Francis also used the Synod to call a consistory of cardinals to discuss the plight of Middle East Christians. On Monday, the Holy Father lamented the persecution of Christians there, especially those in Iraq and Syria. Noting the Christian exodus from the region, he said, "We cannot resign ourselves to thinking about the Middle East without Christians who have for 2,000 years confessed the name of Jesus Christ." He called on the international community to respond to terrorism of previously unimaginable dimensions. In a related story, 4,000 Iraqi Christians who fled the Islamic State are now relocating in Jordan. In spite of the hopes of church leaders in Rome, those Christians have no intention of going home. According to Fides News, the refugees are already seeking admission for their children to attend Jordanian schools and universities. According to Jerusalem's auxiliary archbishop, Maran Laham, two things are clear about the vast majority of Christian refugees. Nobody wants to go back to Iraq, and everyone is trying to get a visa to Australia or America. Occupy Central demonstrations are continuing in Hong Kong as talks between pro-democracy student leaders and the government are making little progress. At issue, reforms for the territory's first direct election scheduled for 2017. The problem, according to the demonstrators, is the slate of candidates will be chosen by the communist regime in Beijing. Demonstrators first took to the streets a month ago to protest the central government's decision to screen candidates. Back in the United States, Cardinal Timothy Dolan returned from Rome this week with a message for New York's faithful. The Pope is coming to the Big Apple. Cardinal Dolan slow-rolled the big news in his weekly archdiocesan column. After writing about preparations for Thanksgiving and Christmas, he enthused, "And we better start preparing for a visit by the Holy Father at the end of next September." Cardinal Dolan said nothing is official yet, but he's rather confident that the Pope will spend a day in New York. Pope Francis is all but confirmed to be in Philadelphia next September for the World Meeting with Families. A New York visit in late September would coincide with the United Nations General Assembly and portends an appearance by Pope Francis there. And Chicago's incoming Archbishop is taking a page out of Pope Francis's playbook. Announced this week, Archbishop-designate Blaise Cupich will forego living in the Archdiocesan mansion and instead reside in the humble rectory at Holy Name Cathedral. The 1885 North State Parkway mansion has been home to every Chicago archbishop since it was built. It has also hosted Pope St. John Paul II and President Franklin Roosevelt. In the meantime, the mansion will be used for official functions and as a guest house. A study committee will consider other uses. With its 19 chimneys, the mansion is valued at over $14 million. Archbishop-designate Cupich will replace Cardinal Francis George and take the reins as leader of Chicago's 2.2 million Catholics on November 18th. This week saw the passing of two Americans who shaped the cultural landscape in their own ways. Longtime Washington Post editor Ben Bradlee died on Wednesday of natural causes. He was 93. During his tenure as leader of the Post newsroom from 1965 to 1991, Bradlee transformed the Post into one of the leading daily publications in the world. He pushed investigative pieces and championed his reporters. He published leaked top-secret Vietnam War documents, which became known as the Pentagon Papers. He did so against the demands of the government. The Nixon administration sued, but the U.S. Supreme Court sided with the press in a landmark First Amendment decision. Bradlee also quarterbacked the Woodward and Bernstein investigation that later became known as the Watergate scandal. This, of course, led to the historic resignation of President Nixon. The New York Times reported that Bradlee was twice divorced. By the mid-1970s, he began dating Post-style section reporter Sally Quinn. Now, a third marriage was a questionable proposition, according to Bradlee. He said he would marry Ms. Quinn when the Catholic Church elected a Polish pope. Cardinal Karol Wojtyła became pope on Wednesday, October 16, 1978. Bradlee and Quinn were married the following Sunday. And finally, Helen Hull Hitchcock, a Catholic laywoman who battled radical feminist ideology within the church, died on Monday after a brief illness. She was 75. Hitchcock was the founding director of Women for Faith and Family. It was created in 1984 when the Catholic bishops were crafting a pastoral letter to the women of the United States. Concerned that dissent was working its way into the document, Hitchcock and her group wrote a statement affirming fidelity to church teaching. Thousands would sign on. Hitchcock appeared on Mother Angelica's show back in 1986 to discuss her efforts.
These are not times of peace, either in the world or in the church, and it is absolutely necessary for people to prepare themselves to defend the faith, whatever risk that may involve. In the current circumstances, when so many of the people who are attacking the church are also women, it is especially necessary for women to respond to this. The church needs her women now like it never has before.
By 1993, after 9 years of contentious debate, the U.S. bishops abandoned the idea of a pastoral letter. She was editor of the Adoremus Bulletin and an activist for promoting a faithful liturgy. For 15 years, Helen Hull Hitchcock served on the EWTN Board of Governors. She is survived by her husband, James. May she rest in peace.